I still can't believe what you asked me to do near that bank. That's what the driver said to me through the rearview mirror, and my heart froze, because I had no idea what he was talking about. He thought I was someone else. And in the next 10 minutes, a stranger would hand me a secret about my own son that shattered everything I believed about him. Welcome to Revenge, Dad. This story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and meaningful storytelling, but the lesson inside it is something I believe you need. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from before we begin. I've woken up at 5 a.m. for 38 years, ever since I opened my shop, but that morning, January 6th, I woke 15 minutes early on my own, lying in the dark with something warm sitting in my chest. Pride. My son Ethan was flying to Tokyo that morning, his first overseas business trip, and I wanted to see him off. I wrapped a gift the night before, my old leather tool roll, the one I'd carried since 1986, 12 pockets, each shaped by whatever tool had lived there longest. I wanted him to have something that had been somewhere. I got dressed, grabbed the package, and stepped out into a thick January fog. 2 black sedans sat at the curb. I climbed into the closer one without a second thought, dropped into the back seat, and the driver pulled away without a word. Half a block in, he glanced at me in the mirror and said, "Ethan, heading to LAX early today, huh?" I froze. He thought I was my son. Something told me to stay quiet and listen. "I still remember that run a few weeks back," he went on, "when you asked me to take you past the old bank district on the east side." My throat tightened. Ethan had never mentioned any bank district. The driver kept talking, easy and conversational. The questions I'd supposedly asked about which intersections had cameras, what times patrols came through. "I used to work security at Wells Fargo for 8 years, he said. "When somebody starts asking that kind of thing, you remember it." He said I'd made a phone call in the back seat once. "You said after this trip, everything gets settled." Then, last week, I'd apparently asked him how bank foreclosures worked, how fast a property goes to auction after a business defaults. I pulled off my hat. He looked at me in the mirror, and his face drained of color. "Sir," he said, "you're not Ethan." "No," I said. "I'm Walter Bennett. I'm his father, and I think you just told me everything my son never wanted me to know." He pulled over so fast the tires scraped the curb. His name was Caleb Morrison, 45, a former bank security guard who now drove for a living. He was mortified. He'd never confirmed my identity in the fog and the dark. But I didn't want an apology. I wanted the rest of it. Caleb pulled out a small notebook, an old habit, he said, writing down anything that felt off on a ride. Ethan had used his car 6 times over the past 6 weeks, always early, always around Pacific Coast Bank on South Spring Street. First, just to look. Then the questions started. Cameras, patrol timing. Once Ethan had him wait around the block while he walked the area on foot for 20 minutes, coming back with his shirt damp though it was 50 degrees out. And that phone call, word for word from Caleb's notebook. "It's handled on my end. After this trip, everything gets settled. Just make sure your guy doesn't get jumpy." Then, 10 days ago, the foreclosure questions. "A man who's just curious," Caleb said, "doesn't ask that at 6 in the morning after 20 minutes casing a bank." He looked at me steady. "Whatever he's planning, it involves that bank. And it might involve something a lot closer to home for you." I sat there gripping the tool roll on my lap like it weighed 100 pounds. Caleb drove me the rest of the way to LAX, no charge, apologizing the whole way. At the terminal, I found a pillar and watched from a distance before I let myself approach. I told myself I was getting my bearings. Really, I was bracing for the possibility that I wouldn't recognize what I saw in my son's face. And I didn't like what I saw. Ethan stood near the counter in his charcoal blazer, checking his phone every few seconds. A tight, urgent check, not the check of a man waiting on a boarding call. He made a short call, turned his back to the room, shoulders stiff. When he hung up, he scanned the terminal in a slow arc, the way you look around when you want to be sure no one's watching. He looked right through me, and never saw me at all, because he wasn't looking for his father. He was looking for something else. I watched him walk through security and vanish. Then I sat on a bench outside and called the closest thing I had to a brother, Frank Duca, 63, a retired PI who'd known me since 1989. "I need you to do something for me," I told him. "And I need you to not ask why yet. He didn't hesitate. Tell me what you need. Back home, the house felt smaller somehow. I logged into the joint bank account I'd added Ethan to 6 years earlier. The balance hit me like a fist. $11,240 in an account that used to hold $30,000 to $40,000. 3 withdrawals over the past few months. $4,000 for a car repair emergency. $6,000 for an investment opportunity. $5,000 more with no explanation at all. $15,000 gone. My roof repair fund, saved $50 at a time for years. I called the bank. All 3 withdrawals had been authorized through the portal with the correct credentials. And there was more. A secondary Visa card opened in my name 14 months ago that I never applied for. Most recent charge, the Venetian Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, 3 days ago. Check-in January 4th, 2 full days before Ethan told me he was leaving for Tokyo. My son had lied to my face at this very table. Frank called that evening. Ethan hadn't worked at Pacific West Freight in 8 months. He'd been walked out for deliberate misconduct. 8 months of mornings, getting dressed, driving off to a job that no longer existed, coming home with stories about meetings and promotions. And there was a voicemail on my phone from a company called Meridian Credit, asking about an account in my name. Frank told me not to call them back yet. Don't let Ethan know you know anything, he said. Not yet. The next day, over cold coffee at a shop on Victory Boulevard, Frank laid it out further. Meridian Credit was a hard money lender, the kind you go to when the banks have already said no twice. And the name on the paperwork, Ryan Cole, was tied to a Nevada shell company called Pacific Rim Holdings, with a 2019 fraud case that had quietly fallen apart. If Ethan's connected to this man, Frank said, this isn't a debt problem. This is something else. He handed me the name of an elder law attorney, Diana Reyes, and told me to call her first thing. Diana didn't waste time. Within minutes of pulling county records, her face changed. There was a lien on my shop, a $180,000 deed of trust from Meridian Credit, filed under a power of attorney supposedly signed by me on October 4th, granting Ethan full financial authority. I remembered that day. I'd had a heart procedure at Cedars-Sinai and been given medication that blurred everything on the drive home. Ethan had told me we needed to stop and sign some insurance paperwork. I signed without reading it. Under California law, Diana explained, a power of attorney signed while impaired is void. But there was worse news. A Nevada LLC had already contacted the lender about the auction timeline for my property. They're positioned to buy your shop the moment that loan defaults, she said. Someone used your name, your property, and your trust to set this in motion. File it, I told her. That night I went looking for medical records and found something else entirely. Margaret's old jewelry box, untouched for 22 years, with a sealed letter inside addressed to me. My late wife had written it before she died. There are things I want you to know about Ethan, she'd written. He knows your love for him has no floor, no ceiling, no condition attached to it. I'm afraid someone, maybe even him, will use that against you. Don't let the love make you blind, Walter. Trust yourself with people the way you trust yourself with machines. I sat with that letter until 3 in the morning. Frank called with the rest the next day. Ryan Cole had a history of moving stolen money through shell companies. Pacific Rim Holdings had no employees, no assets, just a company built to catch my shop when it fell. And the $180,000 from my mortgage hadn't gone to pay off Ethan's debts at all. It moved straight into Cole's account within 48 hours. That was Ethan's buy-in. His payout, once the shop sold at a rigged auction, would be roughly 30%, over $100,000, from the business he knew I'd never willingly sell. Frank sent photos a few days later. Ethan, laughing in a hotel hallway in Las Vegas, the night I thought he was already overseas. A one-way flight itinerary, Los Angeles to Las Vegas, no Tokyo leg at all. A hotel folio from the Venetian, charged to the card in my name. He hadn't gone to Tokyo. He'd built an elaborate performance just so I'd watch him leave, while he was already 3 states deep into spending money that wasn't his. I felt something colder than anger, something quieter, certain. Diana had more too. She laid the forged power of attorney next to an old insurance signature from a 2019 shop accident, when a hydraulic press had crushed my hand. My real signature that day was a wreck, shaking, uneven, dragged sideways by a tremor I've had ever since. The POA signature was smooth and controlled. No tremor at all. "Someone spent time learning to write your name," she said. My son had practiced forging my signature until he could do it clean. She'd already filed an emergency motion. The auction was frozen. A civil hearing was set for February 25th, and under California law, financial exploitation of a victim over 65 is a felony. My son was 20 years younger than the age that law protects. I wasn't. Caleb came by that week with Frank, notebook in hand. He'd gone home the day of the airport ride, listened back through his dashcam audio from every trip with Ethan, and called the FBI that same afternoon. He'd been sitting on an open, low-priority file about Ryan Cole from the 2019 case, until Caleb's recordings turned it into something else entirely. 2 of those recordings had Ethan describing the bank's layout in detail. One had him confirming a date over the phone. Then Frank told me the rest. The FBI had picked up Ryan Cole 2 days earlier. Cole's lawyer had him cooperate in exchange for leniency, and he gave them Ethan. There was a warrant. They'd be waiting for him when he landed. 9 days passed like grinding gears. I went to the shop every morning, taught the young men from the county program how to read a torque spec, tried to sleep in pieces. The night before Ethan came home, I laid every piece of evidence out on the kitchen table in order. The photos, the bank statements, the forged POA beside the hospital discharge papers, Frank's report on Ryan Cole. I looked at the picture of Ethan laughing in that hotel hallway for a long time, trying to find the boy who used to stand in my shop doorway asking questions I never got tired of answering. He was still in there somewhere, but something else had grown alongside him. At 7:22 the next evening, I heard his key in the lock. He came in glowing, talking about Tokyo, meetings that never happened, a city he'd never seen. I let him talk for 4 minutes. Then I set the folder on the table. I watched his face change with each document: the hotel photo, the one-way ticket, the bank statements, the forged signature beside the hospital record. His hand started shaking. "I can explain," he tried, and then he couldn't. When I asked him directly about the $180,000 and Pacific Rim Holdings, the silence lasted 4 seconds before he broke down, not with the tears of a sorry man, but the tears of a caught one. "I'm in trouble, Dad," he said. "I have been for a long time." The doorbell rang. I stood up. "That'll be them," I said, and walked to the door while my son sat frozen at the table, finally understanding exactly what those words meant. The hearing happened 5.5 weeks later. Diana laid out every piece of evidence with the same calm precision she'd shown from day one. The medication records, the signature analysis, the wire transfers. The judge declared the power of attorney void, permanently blocked the foreclosure, and dismissed every claim Pacific Rim Holdings had on my shop. 38 years of my life, still mine. I went back to work the next morning. The shop smelled the way it always had: oil, metal, solvent, and underneath it all, the smell of 38 years of effort. I took out the old tool roll I'd meant to give Ethan and set it back on my workbench, not as a gift anymore, but as something that belonged where it was. Marcus and the other 2 young men from the county program showed up like they did every day, a little uncertain, looking for something worth showing up for. I gave it to them the same way I'd tried to give it to my son. A few weeks later, Frank had Caleb and me over for dinner in his backyard in Burbank. Nobody mentioned Ethan, or the hearing, or the warrant. We talked about the Dodgers and Frank's bad knee, and Caleb's daughter learning to drive. It was the first real laugh I'd had in months. When I got home that night, there was a letter waiting on my porch step, postmarked from the detention center downtown, in my son's handwriting. I made tea and read it slowly. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make excuses. He wrote about the debt that spiraled out of control, about Ryan Cole's plan that he'd told himself was just business, about driving me to that notary and holding out the pen knowing I couldn't fully read what I was signing. "That is the thing I have to live with," he wrote. "Not the money, not the shop. You trusted me completely, and I used it." He wrote about his mother, about watching me sit with her in her last winter, and only now beginning to understand what that kind of love actually costs. He didn't ask me to visit. He didn't ask me for anything. He just signed it the way he always had. Just Ethan, in his mother's careful handwriting. I sat with that letter a long time. Then I carried it into the living room and set it on the shelf beside Margaret's photograph. Not because I'd forgiven everything, and not because I had any answers yet, but because it belonged near her. She would have known what to do with it better than I did. I still love my son. I know that now the way you know something that costs you to admit, but it's a different love than the one I had before, worn down to something harder, something more honest, the way metal gets honest after you've worked it long enough. I spent 67 years believing that loving someone completely was the same as knowing them completely. It isn't. And that difference nearly cost me everything I'd built. Love without clarity isn't protection. It's an open door. I left mine open for 34 years, and someone I raised walked right through it. Read what you sign. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Betrayal in a family doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, in small kindnesses that are actually withdrawals, in trust spent behind your back. The bravest thing you can do for the people you love is to keep seeing them clearly, even when it costs you to look. If any part of this reached you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Family betrayal leaves marks, so does surviving it. Thank you for staying until the last word.